Warning: fake blood, gore, and disturbing images. Viewer discretion advised. There is a little parlor on display. There are tiny little blue chairs with flowers on them to decorate the room. Beautiful light fixtures guard the door. But there's something else in this room. A body. A body of a girl, along with a hammer inches away from her half-decomposed face. Who did this? Was it the girl, or was this a site of a murder? This diorama is known as the parsonage. It shows the discovery site of Dorothy Denison's unexpected death. Parsonage is one of the 19 surviving dioramas made by Frances Glessner Lee. By using the clues hidden carefully in the diorama, training investigators learn how to explain unexplained deaths. While this might sound like a common practice, this form of training was non-existent in the early 1900s. The nutshell studies of unexplained death frontiered a new way for criminologists in the 1950s to alter their preconceived ideas on unexplained crime scenes, teaching them to rely on medical examinations to form conclusions. The legal justice system before the nutshell studies of unexplained death was the extremely corrupt coroner system. The coroner system consisted of coroners and jurors. In the case of an unexplained death, the coroner assigned to the district would collect a group of jurors. These jurors would be randomly selected citizens from around the district. The coroner would then lead an investigation of the unexplained death. With the rise of urbanization, unexplained deaths were harder to solve. If there was a murder, the murderer could easily distance themselves from the crime by modern transportation systems such as streetcars. Along with this major problem, coroners were also vulnerable to bribes. If a coroner was more concerned about money than justice, certain rulings of death might be tampered with. In one specific case, a baby's body was discovered in a district of Boston. After the trial, in which the coroner was paid $10 and each member of the jury was paid $2, the child's body was planted in another district of Boston. In doing so, another coroner and set of jury members were able to make a profit out of this case. This process happened in 4 different districts before the public caught on. This was one of the main causes that caused the coroner system to be abolished. Because of the system, Frances Glessner Lee and George McGrath were inspired to change legal medicine. In the time that the coroner system was coming to an end, George McGrath and Frances Glessner Lee were starting to form their legacy. Frances Glessner Lee was born to Frances M. Glessner and John Jacob Glessner. Her father made his fortune building International Harvester. Frances grew up as a typical wealthy child, training to become a model housewife. Frances married at 19 years old to Blewett Lee. After having 3 kids together and multiple separations and reunions, the couple divorced in 1914. After the divorce, Frances was able to pursue her creative tendencies, whether it was making homemade candy and ice cream with the kids in the summer home or making tiny dioramas. George McGrath was Lee's brother George Glessner's good friend. They both went to Harvard for college. Frances also wanted to go to Harvard but was not permitted by the school due to the fact that she was a woman. But through her brother, Frances and McGrath became friends and later colleagues. McGrath was a firm believer in the need to require autopsies for every unexplained death. Due to this belief, he became a highly trained and skilled pathologist. This experience helped him become one of the most respected professors at the Department of Legal Medicine at Harvard. Along with that, he became one of the most cherished friends and advisors to Frances Glessner Lee. The Glessner family, being extremely wealthy, went to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra numerous times. The Glessner had personal relationships with many of the members of the orchestra. Because of this, Frances decided that she would make a model of the orchestra for her mother's 65th birthday. She made all 90 musicians into tiny dolls, complete with their individual instruments, clothes, and music. The conductor also had a tiny score, handwritten by conductor Frederick Scott, a friend of the Glessners. When presented to her mother and the orchestra, the viewers were awed by the work Lee put into the model. Later in life, she will use the skills she learned from this model for the nutshell studies of unexplained death. Frances Glessner Lee made a total of 20 dioramas, with 19 surviving to this day. The missing diorama is presumed lost or destroyed. For all her models and dioramas, Lee decided on a 1:12 ratio. This means that 1 inch in the diorama equals a foot in real life. So if a rug is 4 feet in real life, it would be 4 inches in the diorama. Lee's dioramas are also fully functional. The tiny belts can unbuckle, or little shoes can be untied. Lee also handmade many of the furnishings of these dioramas. Lee would use sewing needles to knit tiny socks and hand paint little can labels. She also would hand paint the bodies that would adorn the dioramas realistically. The cases represented in these models are based off of different cases in real life, creating a sense of realism.
Bruce Goldfarb, who maintains the dioramas, says they're still used to help hone the observation skills of investigators.
Their value today is the same. There's no other medium that you could do this.
And while the crimes they depict happened more than 70 years ago, Frances Glessner Lee recognized that some things never change.
There's drinking. There are prostitutes, poor people who are really far removed from Frances's own social circles.
So why do you think she created it this way?
Because she felt that it was important, because that person's death deserves the same investigation as anybody else.
Basing her dioramas off of real cases, Lee had plenty of references for designing her dioramas. Anything she didn't know, she would ask George McGrath. Together, they made 19 dioramas with perfectly accurate details. Body angles, skin color, and blood splatters are all true to real-life science. One of the dioramas from the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death is Kitchen. The diorama shows the scene investigators found when they arrived. The deceased, Robin Barnes, was found dead by her husband, Fred Barnes. He claims to have been away in town and came back to find her dead body. After a quick look, viewers can notice that Robin was in the middle of doing numerous tasks. The laundry was unfinished, there is a pie halfway out of the oven, and Robin is found near the open icebox. The viewers can also note that there is a newspaper stuffed inside of the door. This hints towards a suicide. But why would someone commit suicide in the middle of housework? In Lee's typescript explaining the diorama, she writes the answer to Robin's unexplained death. In reality, Fred and Robin fought often and had a big argument the day Robin died. Robin was in the middle of her wifely duties when Fred came home after creating a plan to get rid of his wife. He knocked her in the head with a rolling pin, making her unconscious. He then stuffed newspaper in the doorframe to make it look like a suicide. The knife he used to stuff the newspaper is sitting on the chair right next to the door. After locking the doors, Fred then turned the burners of the gas stove on and climbed out the window. Lee explains that the spring lock of the window shows that he closed the window after climbing out. Along with visual proof of the scene, Lee notes that Fred's fingerprints were found on the knife and that after a medical examination, Robin was discovered to have been killed from carbon monoxide poisoning. The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death were able to change forensic science throughout time. When Lee first introduced the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death, legal medicine was corrupt and unjust. By using the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death, along with teaching from professors such as George McGrath, forensic scientists were able to learn how to properly look at clues in an unexplained death scene. Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death are visual teaching tools for trainees. These dioramas are jam-packed with details specifically for the trainees to understand what to look for and how to interpret those telltale clues. Along with the training investigators' eyes, the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death also shows the importance of medical examinations or autopsies. For example, in the diorama Kitchen, the cause of the death of Robin Barnes would have been unknown as she did not have any visible clues to her death. Without knowing how she died, the solution of the case might not have been found. The diorama shows that there is a large amount of information that can be found in a death scene, but not enough to make it a true cause of death. Along with showing the techniques needed to explain an unexplained death, the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death also show that all deaths are important. In the time the diorama was made, the only unexplained deaths that were important were those of famous or wealthy people. The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death purposely were about middle to lower class citizens. Lee not only changed the forensic field, but she also defied social economic class discrimination. In the 1940s to 50s, the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death introduced a new way for criminologists to look at crime scenes. They also taught people to not just rely on their eyes, but the medical examinations. The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death left a large legacy of ideas, dioramas, and changed the forensic field forever. Using tiny details hidden in plain sight, these dioramas helped to frontier a new way of thinking. The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death showed a way to find the truth in a nutshell.